woke up feeling grateful, thankful, everything that I pray for came so. I be feeling so grateful, got me feeling so grateful. Yeah, I woke up feeling grateful, thankful, everything that I pray for came so.
Trent the Wizard, how are you today?
I am doing actually really fantastic. How are
That's
you?
awesome.
Getting the biking?
Doing well, man. I'm sitting in my cubicle overlooking Lake Tahoe, so that never sucks.
No, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Every time I work from the deck, I feel like I'm getting away with something. It's like
Yeah,
this
it's like
is a
you're
great day.
cheating or something.
Yeah, it totally feels like that. Yeah. So, yeah, and the weather dictates that. 6 months out of the 4 or 5 months out of the year, the deck is just buried in snow, so it's
Yeah.
impossible to sit out here. And then during the summer, it's hit and miss. But yeah, today is one of those special days where it's pristine and I can sit outside and
Smell the pines.
yeah, yes, exactly. So hey, welcome everyone. If you ever wanted to spend an hour with a wizard and Viking, you came to the right place. This is the Tao of Glass podcast, where we cover all things physical and metaphysical and try to lump it all together and make some sense of it in this screwball world, screwball universe. This is our 10th episode. So congratulations, Trent.
Yes, Kevin. We made it to 10.
I know. It's fun. Yeah. And for those of you who have not necessarily consumed the other 9, I'll just share with you, like, this is Trent and I started having these deep conversations about the meaning of life and spirituality and the universe and how it all connects and how it connects to daily life as humans. And then one day we're like, man, we should just hit record. So, this is not our full-time job. This is an adventure. Trent and I would have these conversations regardless, and we were doing this. And then at some point we're like, let's hit record and share it, because somebody somewhere might find a gem that helps them along their path. And if that it ends up being true, then it's a blessing for everybody. So for our 10th episode, so Trent, I'm going to share with you, like, when I was thinking about approaching our 10th episode, I was thinking like, oh, it should be a thing, right? Like it, and I was thinking like it should be different from the other episodes. Like we should do more story time, right? Like let's just tell stories and share revelations that we've had along the way and that sort of thing. But as this last week progressed, I personally hit on a couple of things in my life and in my journey that I felt were more important than sort of pre-scripting what a 10th episode should be. Like instead of, it hit me that I'm like, we've never had any construct. I mean, we have some construct, but we have like a path that we follow on our episodes, but it's not scripted in any way. And then we're not intentionally saying, okay, like, yeah, next time we're going to talk about this, right?
Yeah.
And so we just let our lives sort of guide us toward topics. And so I ended up resolving that with myself anyway, and realizing that, hey, we don't have to, just because it's 10 is just a number. Just because it's the 10th, it doesn't mean we have to do a specific thing. And so I'll share with you what sort of hit home with me in the last week or so that I really wanted to explore with you today. Yeah. And so we're going to get deeper into Asian philosophy, and I'll tell you why. So, I don't know, a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago, I proclaimed that I'm dedicating my life to a life of grace and gracefulness. And gracefulness is something that you and I have talked about on previous episodes. But for me personally, I aspire to and am committed to, like, I'm committing to living a more graceful existence. And so, and for me, that means a lot of things. All right. So it's a personal commitment that I take seriously, but it's born from, I don't know, like my Viking nature, which is not always that graceful.
It's deeply committed.
Yeah. Like one of my favorite expressions that I came up with somewhere in my life was, let's burn that bridge when we cross it. Right? It's definitely a Viking perspective.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you know, it's there might be damage along the way, but we're gonna have a great time, right, on the journey. And so what hit me is that you know, we talked about on prior episodes, we talked about, like, you know, nature doesn't need to be told how to be graceful. It's in the code, or it's in the DNA, right? There, we talked about genetic memory and the fact, like, that a bee doesn't need to be taught how to go collect pollen. It
Right.
comes out of the honeycomb, and one day it leaves and it flies in a certain direction. And bees have language. They appear to have some, organization, social structure, some level of telepathy. They clearly use geomagnetic signals to navigate. And so there's a lot going on there. And they don't need to be taught how to fly out of the hive and collect pollen. They just do it. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give one more example, and then I'll bring it back home to a personal level. So another example, a friend of mine recently described to me is like, because we're talking about like motivation, right? Like some days for each of us as humans, there are days where you get up and you're ready to go. You're like, yeah, man, I'm ready to play today. Like, I'm going to get as many at bats as I can, and I'm gonna go for it. I'm all in, right? And there are days where you wake up and you're like, okay, right? I don't know, I don't feel ready today. I don't feel ready to do anything.
I just make some coffee first with that. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, exactly.
Take a little break, meditation first. Like,
right. Yeah. And so a friend of mine the other day was describing how he's like, yeah, but think about it. He's like, a bird doesn't get up in the morning, like at the crack of dawn when all the birds start chirping. A bird doesn't get up and stand on the edge of the nest and turn around and look at its family and say, not really into it today. Today, I'm not going out there and risking my life, potentially getting eaten by a cat or a bigger bird or getting hit by a car. I'm not going to risk it today. I'm not into it. I don't feel like it. I'm not going out to pick up worms and bring them home for my family today. I'm just going to hang. I'm going to sit tight, lay low, lay in the nest, and just watch the world go by. They don't do that ever. No. If you're a bird, you get up, crack of dawn, you go find food for your family.
Yep.
And so it actually is a strange part of the human condition that we have that option. Like, we as a species have evolved to a point where we can decide in the morning when we wake up whether we want to do a single thing that day. And it's kind of unique to people.
Yeah. It really is. And I think it's interesting to like think about that in the nature of our consciousness, the nature of our awareness, you know, in the sense that, like, not that we're necessarily more special than other creatures, but our higher level of awareness and consciousness allows us, you know what I mean? And for me, really, it's free will to just choose that.
Right.
You know, I think that there's a higher level emotional intelligence, a higher level of conscious awareness that really allows us to exercise that free will, because birds can choose. Am I going to fly this way? Am I going to fly that way? Right. And for them, it's going to be mostly instinctual. It's not going to be like, well, I'm going to make a choice. It's like, well, something sniffs better or whatever, however they're perceiving the world. That's their instinctual direction that they just go. It may not be the same every day. You know what I mean? So
yes, that's fascinating.
Their style of choice is different than our style of choice. And I think a lot of that comes to the higher level of emotional intelligence that we carry with our conscious awareness.
I think that's right. Yeah, well said.
So
Yeah. So then bringing it full circle. So I started contemplating, well, like the state of nature is grace. Birds do what they do, fish do what they do. And there's a level of gracefulness that is just natural and normal in nature. And so I started contemplating, well, like, what about me? Like, why can't I do that? I know I can, but I don't always. There are times when I do. And you may need to help me on this one. I'm forgetting the expression, but there's a Chinese philosophy expression. The phrase is escaping me. You might know it off the top of your head, but there's a phrase for that describes the effortless nature of being. That it really is a yin yang philosophy where sometimes less effort generates a greater result. Like if you're just flowing with energy and nature and being graceful, that sometimes you have a better result versus like trying really hard. Like I'm going to work really
yes.
hard, try really hard to make this thing happen. Instead, by flowing with energy and the universe, better outcomes may occur.
Yes. So actually, this is from the Tao, and it's called Wu Wei,
Wu Wei, thank you.
non-action. Yeah. So non-action
Non-action.
does
Yes.
not mean like I'm not doing things, but it means
Right.
that I'm acting thoughtfully, not impulsively, is really what that means. And so there's like you say, there's a different level of grace there from thoughtfulness to impulsivity. So having that kind of grace within that wu wei non-action of just being in the flow, because there are so many things that you can't control, that you don't control. And so taking this approach of non-action, well, I'm going to just go with the flow in a thoughtful manner,
Yes.
thereby having grace.
Yes. Wu Wei.
Wu wei.
Love that. So let me share with you the conflict that and so this is kind of how Trent and I operate. We bring our conflicts to each other that we're trying to resolve, and then go deep and explore it and figure out like, well, where does the truth lie there, right? And like what's true north, and how does that fit in with the universe at a macro level, and how do I bring that home on a personal level? And so I'll share with you the conflict that I realized in the last 10 days that that I'm looking to explore and resolve with you now, which is,
Right.
it occurred to me. So I clearly am, I mean, I believe I'm thoughtful and deliberate. I do, I mean, this is my self-awareness and self-assessment moment, right? So I am empathetic. I do care about other people, and I care about influencing positive outcomes, right? I care about these things. And yet I am clearly cut from a warrior mold. Like we joke about like I'm a Viking, but I kind of am, right?
Yeah.
Like I live life with vigor, and I am ready to go into battle at any moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Totally.
Mostly figuratively, sometimes literally. I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Depending on the
I'm kind of
circumstance. Like,
exactly. Yes. And so it occurred to me because I started thinking, well, what is a graceful warrior? And what flashed in my head is samurai. And then the other example would be like the fighter pilots and bomber pilots in World War II Japan, where I've seen footage of the warriors who are about to fly into battle from Japan, right, or from wherever they're stationed or an aircraft carrier, and they have a ritual that they follow. It's ceremony. There's a ceremony. It's ceremonial for them to pray and meditate and like bow down on a aircraft carrier deck and have a shot of sake and greet the rising sun before going into battle. Like, it's ritualistic and it's ceremonial, and it's actually a beautiful thing. Like, to see that, it's beautiful. There's something harmonious and graceful about these warriors who are preparing for battle, and there's a real deep dichotomy there. And before I turn it over to you, I just want to go deeper for a minute on like the way of the samurai, which again, very ceremonial. Yoga before battle, right? The just the routines for muscle memory and spiritual memory of different movements with a sword, and the philosophy of battle. And there's a difference also between what an emperor is experiencing and leading versus what the warrior is experiencing and leading on a battlefield. They're very different, and yet there's synergy and harmony, and they're based on or rooted in certain principles. And so it occurred to me that there is something potentially ceremonial and harmonious and graceful about being a warrior. And I personally don't fully understand that yet, because there are times when I am very graceful and there are times when I'm a warrior, and I don't feel like I've connected the two.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to throw that out there and get your response, and really go deep today on like Asian philosophy and Asian culture and how all of that, where is the yin and yang, and how does that, it's easy to say, oh, yin and yang, right? You've got
Right.
harmony and ceremony, and you've got battle, and those are two sides of the same thing. It's one thing to say it. It's something very different to experience it or internalize it and embrace it. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, and I think, that's a great way for us to kind of lead back into the Tao. You know what I mean? That was so the Tao really kind of has this idea that, like, first of all, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. It's not something that you can, it's ineffable. It's something that like can't necessarily be described because it is everything, everywhere, all at once, right? But it is something that you can interact with. And so it really comes through personal experience. So Tao, or Tao, is the way, De, De, the Tao Te Ching. The De means virtue, and Jing means power. So the way and its power. And so when I think about, these different Asian philosophies, because they all kind of bleed into each other. Like historically, you have Confucianism that then kind of turns into, the Tao, and then you have Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes Buddha, and you have Buddhism that then goes widespread, you know what I mean, all over the place. You also have yoga. I mean, yoga was kind of in there in the mix, like really early. It was an oral tradition for a couple thousand years before 500 BC, when Patanjali wrote the first written manuscript on yoga. But what's interesting is like Buddhism has, the Eightfold Path. And then you also have the same thing in yoga. You have the 8 limbs of yoga, and they are very, very similar. And so really what this is, and kind of coming back to the Tao, is, this Wu way of non-action, of being in the flow. I think that's kind of the graceful warrior mentality of like, you're in the flow. It's not like you want to go to war necessarily, but if that's what's nature's requiring of you, you can still do that with grace. You can still maintain, and like for the Wu way, there's really like 4 main principles. It's acting thoughtfully. It's also acting in harmony with nature, living in peace, simplicity, and tranquility, and then also having solitary meditation, that internal perspective, and that's kind of one of the things of realistically of being able to flow in harmony with nature. really depends on that inner self of like getting to know yourself. And what that means is kind of like getting to know and get a deeper relationship with the source of existence, or, the Tao, the way. And I think that nature is, this is kind of bringing it way modern, but there's a fantastic book by a guy named Victor Schauberger, who was a forest warden in Austria and was actually the inventor of the logging flume. He wrote a book called Nature is My Teacher. He has some of the greatest philosophy of what we would call modern times. And he was just a guy walking through the forest, staring at rivers and, you know what I mean, taking, being a warden of the forest. That's where all of his philosophy came from, is living that simple, peaceful, tranquil life and kind of moving with the flow. You know what I mean? And I think that that's where kind of the same thing with, yoga. And I mean, Buddhism really is like the elimination of suffering and like ways to eliminate. I mean, you have to recognize first that there is suffering, and then you have to deal with that and detach oneself from that suffering, and then you free yourself. And there's this eightfold path of how you do that, right? Whereas yoga is much more unifying yourself with your true self, right? It's using these 8 limbs, pranayama, asanas, which are poses, so breath work, poses, meditation, and they go into some other things that are not as easily as translated, but like um, the different more intellectual and mental states, which is more meditative and really getting kind of to that peaceful state. And I think that when you come to that peaceful state, that's where you can truly reconcile I'm living this simple, peaceful life, yet before me there is a battle that needs to be fought. And so, depending on your perspective, I can go in the flow and go into that battle, but I can do it with grace, because I've been cultivating this practice within myself and within my life, this natural harmony, so to speak, to where that to like help maintain that harmony in nature, there's someone. I mean, that's typically why wars start, right? It's because someone's not acting harmoniously, not living a simple or tranquil life. And that's kind of the yin and the yang. There's the aggressor and the defender, right? When we talk about battles and wars and things like that. And I think that it's okay that, like, even bringing it to like a more metaphorical sense in our daily lives of, relationships and things like that. Like, how much do you fight? Like, how much do you, what is your intentional consciousness in your choices, in like the choices that you're making, within your business, within your family relationships and personal relationships? Is there like an agenda there, or is it truly just trying to be present and in harmony with them? Or is there something there that's ulterior, right, that they may not be aware of? And it's, again, the quality of that, it doesn't, not necessarily that's bad in one way or another, because it depends on the nature of that agenda. Like, what are you trying to do? And as long as it's something that is mutually beneficial, I don't think that, being a warrior, going out and kind of banging the drums and swinging the swords to try and get things done, is necessarily a bad thing. It really is circumstantial. And I think that that's one of the hardest things. And that's why the Tao, right? That's why the harmony, and that's why the thoughtful action comes in, is because that's, it's not just like, oh, impulsively, like, person, go, you know what I mean? It's like, what is person doing? How, do you know what I mean? Like, think about it a little bit and be a little bit more thoughtful. And then if the need really arises, well, then yeah, pull out the sword and go fight the battle. But there may be other ways, right? There may be other strategies, there may be other things that can happen. So
yeah, I think that's an important piece, right? Is looking ahead, like taking the time to really deliberate and look ahead to what the desired outcome is for yourself and for others around you, right? Like, what is the desired result and what is required to get there? And sometimes it is, you pressing on in through difficult circumstances, and sometimes it is being aggressive about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times where meditation might be a better, to create a better result. And so there's a couple ways we can take this, but I'd like to go back to just the realization or the acceptance that conflict is normal in nature. Like it's a normal part of nature, and chaos is a common thread in the universe. Like
Yes.
right now, there are stars that are exploding. And if they had planets with life, gone.
Oof.
There are celestial objects crashing into each other violently.
Mm-hmm.
And then something that I always find kind of amusing and ironic is, you watch like nature shows and you see killer whales teaching their young how to
Hunt.
and it's violent,
Yeah.
and they are literally playing with their food, but it's to teach skills.
Yeah.
And so they'll throw a seal pup in the air, and it's horrible to watch and violent, and on a like as a living creature on the planet, you look at that and there's any normal person looks at that and feels like, oh wow, that's really horrific, and it hurts to watch it on some level. On the flip side, that's normal. Animals fight over territory. They fight over food. Hunting is violent.
So
There are territorial conflicts in
yeah.
nature, like all this stuff. And what I find ironic is that like a lot of days, you're sitting in an office or a cubicle and you're like, the internet won't load or this page won't load, and you're upset. But meanwhile, these dramas are playing out in real life all over the planet, all day, all night, every day. Like there are things being hunted every minute of every day at every scale, right? And yet we're like, the coffee maker's broken today. Great,
Yeah.
right?
Gosh. So what is really interesting is that this is actually like something with the Tao. Like this is part of living in harmony. So part of the understanding the Tao is understanding the cycles of change and how they are necessary. So like, for example, day to night, summer to fall into winter, and they have complementary properties to each other that inform the next stage, right? And there's understanding that there is no permanence but impermanence. Everything changes all the time, and that's kind of an understanding of learning to move in that flow. I mean, this last winter we had record winters. I mean, and that was destructive. I mean, in a lot of ways. We're currently having heat waves, like massive heat waves, buckling roads and causing damage and doing things. And this is just nature being nature. But like, this is a natural cycle, and learning to move within that. Like, so for example, like living in harmony, is, it's often put, within Chinese philosophy when it came about, a lot of people were fishermen. So living in harmony or living the way meant you don't overfish. I mean, fishing is still, it's kind of a violent act. You're literally hooking this thing with a piece of metal and pulling it out of its habitat and killing it. You know what I mean? And then eating it. Yet there is a certain level of harmony that can be maintained so that like the ecosystem, that's one of the things that, even nature does this. The only time that nature doesn't do this is when we as humans introduce non-native species somewhere that don't have a harmonistic lifestyle for that environment. You bring porcupines somewhere where there's no natural person, no natural predator for porcupines. Well, they're going to start eating all the bark off the trees and you're going to lose your forest. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think that's part of that whole principle, is understanding that those cycles of change always happen and are always happening.
Yeah. So how do we? It occurred to me while you were saying that humans as a species are really bad at dealing with change. I mean, on a global scale, it's fair to say that most people, the hardest thing for them to deal with is change.
Mm-hmm.
And at every level, right? Change in employment, or change in location. Like, oh, I need to move from here to there. It's painful. It's hard. Changes in relationships, life and death, right? That's the biggest change, right? It's new life comes in and it's totally disruptive.
Yeah.
A life exits and totally disruptive, right?
Mm-hmm.
On a very deep level. And so how do we teach people to be better at just
Being adaptable.
accepting and adapting and even embracing? I think those are three levels, right? They're three different progressive levels,
Yeah.
where I think the ultimate goal would be to embrace change always.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that gets back to some other conversations we've had about expectation, right? Like, people will say like, oh, you can't predict the future, and but every minute of every day you're making decisions about what you're going to do next, and it's
Mm-hmm.
based on the data you have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Like, next I'm going to eat food. Right. That's the thing. Right.
Yeah.
But you don't know if it's going to matter, if you're going to live long enough, or if eating that food you're going to have an allergic reaction or get something caught in your throat. It could be the last bite you ever take, but you're planning for it. You're always planning for something, and it's always different than the last time. And yet on a deeper level, it's hard for people to embrace that every event from micro scale to macro is different and disruptive.
So this is where I think Buddhism plays in fairly well with this concept of change. I mean, that was kind of what he was, Siddhartha Gautama. He was, the son of a clan chief, a prince, so to speak, of his time, lived in luxury and, for his entire life. And then, he one day went outside, the compound walls, and he saw poverty for the first time and was like, whoa, there's a lot of suffering in the world. And so that's kind of when, he started on his journey. And like through his journey, he realized that like extreme luxuriousness, you know what I mean, or decadence, so to speak, doesn't create happiness. No, nor does extreme austerity. Like, really just like pinching and saving and like, you know what I mean? Like only eating a grain of rice. He's like, neither of those bring. And so for him, it was really finding this middle way path. You know what I mean? And it's because it's realizing that the middle way, which I would very much liken unto the Tao in the sense of the Tao, the way, of living harmony, living in this kind of balanced state. And this is kind of a theme throughout all of, Confucianism, the Tao, Buddhism, you get into yoga. It's all about this creating this balance and being able to understand one way or the other. But specifically with the Four Noble Truths, um, it's suffering is an inherent part of existence. That's the truth of suffering. The cause of suffering is desire, craving for sensual pleasures, or we have attachments to things, you know what I mean? Not wanting to change. And so that's the origin of suffering, And then from there, suffering is to be ended. Like for him, the next thing is, well, suffering can be ended by detaching oneself from your desires and attachments, being adaptable. Do you know what I mean? This truth is the ending of suffering, right? And then you have what he calls the Eightfold Path, which is the truth of the path, like the practice to achieve that, essentially. Now, one of the things that I don't necessarily remember where this saying comes from, but it's something that I learned early on is until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, change doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how horrible that situation is. If that person does not feel like that the pain of staying the same is greater than doing differently and doing change. And I think that that's kind of an issue within our own society is we have tried to make it so that things stay the same, right? We've got roads, we've got houses that, maintain temperatures. We've got markets where there's constantly the same food that we can always get year round, no matter what, and this isn't always across the board. And I think that that's why you maybe might find more resilient people. I mean, when I was spending my time down in Brazil, I lived in some really, really impoverished areas. But these people understood that like staying the same wasn't good for them. So they were constantly changing, making more bricks to add onto their little shack, or going out to find food at the market, or to make something that they could sell so they could have money to go and buy food. And these people were happy in this adaptable, like knowing that like some things aren't always going to be available. Like the bus isn't always going to be running. Do you know what I mean? And electricity is not always going to be on. And being okay with that fact is where I think that like really that true happiness, that true reconciliation comes in.
I think that's right. And so I think what you just described is that point of embracing it, embracing that change is constant, pain is real, right? Like, and how we flow through that's where we find gracefulness and the ability to keep moving under any circumstances. And that is very Taoist. You're absolutely right. That is the ultimate I don't know, goal, or if you will, or the goal is enlightenment.
It's the practice.
It's enlightenment, yes, and the practice of it.
Yep.
So there is another thing that flashed in my head though while you were talking, which is that this exploration was played out on Star Trek for a couple of decades, right? Where
Oh yeah.
The Falcon culture was completely unplugging from emotion, like that this theoretical culture was, if you just don't feel anything, if you don't express any emotion, then you don't have, then like they were accepting that if you're willing to give up the emotion of joy and other emotions, then you are also effectively subduing the emotions of pain and everything else. Like if you're monotone always, then you're in a better state. The Dr. Spock thing, right? Like there's no need to laugh or cry. It's just a waste of energy. Which is so, it's actually, and it's kind of funny. This really was explored pretty deeply in Star Trek, where Captain Kirk's view was, no, part of being human, part of the beauty of the human experience is laughing and crying. And so, but it's kind of funny because the Falcon way was kind of,
it was straight logic.
Yeah.
And what the interesting part is Spock really struggled with this because he was half human and half Vulcan.
Right.
So like,
and there were episodes where he did laugh or cry. It was just really rare.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons that I think that, and again, this plays out in Star Trek. I go deep on that philosophy, but like, that's one of the reasons that he respected Kirk so much, because he was able to have that logical mind, yet go to those emotional places and still be on the path. You know what I mean?
I love that. And I love that this conversation has gone full circle from deep Asian philosophy and Buddhism to Star Trek.
Yeah, let's go to the stars, man.
That is really funny. Do you have a favorite episode or anything? What do you remember about Star Trek? Like, what are the things that you liked most, or that you remember most?
It was always live long and prosper.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great phrase.
Like, live long and prosper, and the little, like, being able to do this. I remember spending time as a kid being like,
yeah,
okay, I got it.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
But that phrase, live long and prosper, that is awesome. That's awesome stuff. So So it's not impossible that you and I just spent like a half hour going deep on Asian philosophy, where all we really needed to say was live long and prosper, right? That is
Yeah.
that is the message for the universe,
Yeah. I mean, and
right?
it really is like there's several ways that you can do that. You know what I mean? You can subscribe to Buddhism, you can go to Taoism, you can, you know what I mean? You can do yoga.
Yeah.
There's several different paths, which are really just the same path, just dressed differently. And that's kind of been my conclusion as I've gone through most philosophical ways. You know what I mean? Like the Greeks were the same thing. They were around the same time, but they were far more concerned, you know, speaking of Star Trek, with the cosmos and the nature of reality, and not necessarily like, how do we be more moral and ethical in the way that we govern ourselves?
Yes.
You know, it was more societal rather than like individual. Like that's one of the things with philosophy is like Western philosophy approaches it from like the group to the individual, right? Whereas Eastern philosophy approaches it from the individual, trickles down to the group,
Right.
right? And so it's just kind of that yin yang difference of perspective, which I've always found really fascinating because that exists within the differences between Eastern and Western philosophy. You have that yin yang of approach of going from the individual to the group or from the group to the individual.
Yeah. So sticking with the Hollywood themes for a minute. So yeah, may the force be with you. That's actually a beautiful thing to say. And it's real.
Star Wars.
You want the energy of the universe flowing through you and others and everybody around you and all living things.
Well, what's interesting is like the Jedi actually are very much like, I would say, pseudo Taoists, because I mean the Taoists are really concerned with like immortality and like connecting with that, you know, eternal source of substance, like of origin of all existence, right? Which is of force. That's how you can move a tree or lift a, you know, an X-wing out of a swamp, or you know what I mean?
Right.
Put some rocks on top, is by tapping into that. But it requires a practice in order to be able to actually achieve that power. And that's kind of the same thing with yoga, right? With yoga, it's like that's the end of yoga. By the time you get there, you've unified your five bodies. Now you're one with the universe, you know, you're in samadhi. And so you're able to vibrate your cells at whatever frequency you want. So you can teleport yourself across the world or wherever. Do you know what I mean? You can levitate, you can make bread out of thin air. You know what I mean? Like there's all kinds of wild things. That's kind of the same thing with Buddhism, the state of nirvana, this state, because you ended all the suffering and now you're there. So
that is right. It's fascinating. It really is, and fun.
yeah.
I'm going to share another quote that I stumbled upon at the top of the call, which is this. I'm going to read it verbatim. I don't do that very often on the calls, but read this one verbatim. So Asian philosophy suggests that as soon as a being becomes aware of its own importance is lost. And I think that plays into this this discussion and that yin yang piece perfectly. But I wanted to get your reaction to that and hear your thoughts around that, because that is what drives a lot of human decision making, is the need for self-worth and importance, and that can be super valuable, like if it's in a family setting, like if you are working to be an important parent, like that's a noble cause. If
Right.
But in society, if you branch that out to the macro level, being important isn't actually that important in society, because in just 100 years time, unfortunately for almost everyone, no one's going to know who you were, right? Or maybe 150 years, but ballpark 150 years, most people are lost in history. And if you go up 500 years, even those who are remembered in history might not be remembered accurately.
Correct.
History changes over time.
Yep.
It evolves in ways it should, in my opinion, right? Just because it's, well, again, it gets back to importance, right?
Yeah. So I like that quote because we're very much speaking to egotistical importance, right? And that's really where it comes from, is like this self-important, right? So like I am more important than you for whatever reason that I might deem, right? I think that that's the kind of importance that they're talking about, in that when like you recognize your own importance, feeling like, oh, I'm so important, then that's when your importance becomes important. You know what I mean? Like you lose it. And I think it's because you're losing the way of that harmonistic path, whether that's Taoism or Buddhism or even yoga, right? So for example, like even within an own family setting, I can think, well, since I'm the only one working and my wife is staying home being a mom all day, I'm the most important one for our survival, because I'm going out and earning money so that we can pay bills and buy food and exist, right? When realistically, it's not me that's important. It's that role is important within the family. Someone's got to do it. It doesn't mean it has to be me. My wife could be the one out working and I could be a stay-at-home dad. Do you know what I mean? But that role is important. And notice that role, when you take the self out of it, it becomes a part of just the nature of things, the flow of things. And that's kind of what it means, because someone's got to raise the kids and someone's got to go find the worms. You know what I mean? Like those are important roles. So once that self-importance comes into play, that's where I think that is lost, because no one's more important than the other. Like my wife is extremely important to me, because if she wasn't, like I had to put my daughter in daycare, and you know what I mean? Like I don't, if she died, then it's like, what do? I got to work and take care of my child. Like there's that role no longer is, you know what I mean? It's gone. Or the person fulfilling that role is gone. And I think that's what makes that important, is with how much grace and harmony you fulfill that role, that you find yourself in the flow, whatever role that may be. Maybe a friend, it may be a father, it may be a businessman. But how importantly are you treating that role with grace and harmony?
Yeah, that's right. And so that quickly gets us into an area where it's easy to make the case that like the internet is evil, or I mean, obviously we're using it right now to have this conversation, so there are obvious benefits, right? But it's easy to make the case that okay, we're in a period in civilization where the technology has created new frictions, and importance has a different meaning today than it had even 40 years ago, right? Now people are important if they have likes and followers, right? And that's just like, it's wacky. It's changed society and how people view each other, and in ways that are not necessarily healthy, because people are being reinforced. They're getting false reinforcement, in my opinion. This is an opinion. Yeah. They're getting false reinforcement, and they're getting endorphin hits for being important in ways that probably won't matter in 10 years or 50 years, and certainly not in 100 years.
Yes.
So I think there's a new level of friction in our society where importance is taking on a different tone.
Yeah, and that's, well, it's important to them, and they feel important when they get a bunch of likes. You know what I mean? They get a bunch of views and subscribers. That makes them feel important. But then it's like, well, what else is important? Is it important that you also create a meal for your family? You know what I mean? Like that's important. And so, and there's differing levels. And I agree with you. There is this friction point that technology is creating. I mean, even for example, within cryptocurrency, Federal Reserve and central banks have felt important by maintaining the financial system that has, brought us to where we are today. And some people didn't like it. So they created a completely new technological version that is out of their hands. And so now they're not feeling as important. And we're seeing that play out on that kind of macro scale within financial and technological institutions, you know? And, even now, people, I'm speaking of importance more to that point is with the advent of the internet, what's the value of a university degree? What is the value of going into debt and spending all that money for a degree that could potentially be obsolete within a number of years? I mean, they're talking about this with coders and with the advent of AI. I mean, there's predictions that coders aren't going to exist within 5 years. You'll have people who know code, but they're going to be using AI to write the code. They themselves are not writing the code anymore. So really, they're just AI prompt engineers who have a specific niche background.
Yeah, that is right.
So, like, there is this interesting level of what is important and what is not. Education is important. Learning and being open-minded and trying to continually better yourselves. I mean, that's part of all of these, Taoism, Buddhism, all these things. However, at the same time, there are different ways, as we mentioned. There's several ways to stay on the path. University college is not the only way now. I mean, if you want to go and be a blockchain developer, you're not going to find that degree in very many universities. You're going to go and you're going to find it online through YouTubers who have created their own basically coursework and things like that. So, I mean, again, I think it's for people really defining for themselves what is important for them to feel self-worth instead of thinking themselves as important that gives worth to others.
I think that's right, and it requires meditation.
Yes.
You really do need to be still and listen to your inner voice and explore why you get up every day and do anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Really, truly. I mean, that is the value that holds, which a lot of people, I think it's like, and it's a process. It's a process. It's not like it's going to be like this event. It's just like happens and like, bam, I got it. No, it's a process of learning to, like you said, be still, observe, listen, introspect and reflect on oneself, and then decide, going forward, what am I going to do differently? How am I going to adapt from what's happened to what may happen?
That's right. Yeah, and so that may be this episode's meditation, right? It's something that I think you and I do a lot, and I think it's valuable. Like I know it's valuable for me.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that's valuable for others. Is how you and I routinely take things from micro to macro, macro to micro. Like, is this right for myself? And how does it fit in with the universe? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
this thing is happening in the universe. How does that affect me? And is it even relevant? Does it matter? Right.
Yeah.
And so that sort of accordion meditation, right? Like bringing it out, bringing it back constantly is I think there's some value there.
I absolutely agree. I think that's one of the things of recognizing your space. First of all, like recognize yourself. Like, okay, I'm here now. This is okay. And what's happening around me? You know what I mean? And then further that, like, what are those people? What's happening beyond them? You know what I mean? And how does everything that I'm doing, how does this help or further in some beneficial type way? And this could be, we see this as simple as, there's a guy actually that I remember. This just memory popped into my head. There was this janitor at my dad's office for his law firm that I remember meeting as a kid. I have never met a happier individual because the people around him were grateful and made him feel important. You know what I mean? They didn't just pass him by in the hallways. You know, when he came in, you know, they made way for him, you know what I mean? So that he could push his cart by, so that he could do his job. He felt like an integral, important part of helping to keep the law firm going, dude, by cleaning everyone's space, making sure they had a clean and bright space that, you know, to do their work in. He took a lot of value and self-worth in that. And I always remember being very impressed by this guy. And he was the janitor for like his entire career, like 35, 40 years or something like that. That's what he did.
That's awesome.
And loved it. So, but I think it's recognizing the importance of your role.
Absolutely. Well, Trent, happy 10th episode. This has been an amazing journey already. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. We went all over the place. We went from ancient Buddhism, Taoism to Star Trek and Star Wars. So, hey.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. Do you have a musical shout out this week? Oh, your screen froze. Hang on a second. Hold on a second, Trent. How about now?
Frozen.
Yep. Oh, there we go. We're back.
Better?
That's a Steven edit.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trent,
Yes.
Musical shout out for this episode.
Yeah, musical shout out is a song called Graceful by Connor Price.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And mine is a song called Gracefully by a relatively obscure band, indie band called Element 57. You can find it on the normal places where you would go look for music.
Yeah.
So
wonderful. I'm gonna check that out
yeah,
today.
good times, man. And thank you
yeah.
for sharing. I mean, you know, our conversations are always helpful for me personally. Like I really enjoy these explorations, and I do learn every time, and both from you and from myself. Like you help enable me to learn more from myself, which is, I think that's really the ultimate goal, is helping. If for anyone who tunes in, we've had people tune in. So for anyone who finds us and listens, I think that is the point, is to help people find these gems that help them to go deeper with themselves and explore more. So
Find your path. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, Trent, till next time. Good time.
Till next time, Kevin. Cheers.
Cheers.
Everything's a blur. It comes as no surprise. Everything still hurts. It didn't mend with time. I wouldn't brave the storm.